This is Bloomberg Business of Sports.
The business of sports can be intimidating or hard for a startup to break into.
We really appreciate when our owners are actually there, with us through the journey.
Teams, ours especially, have been very intentional to diversify at all levels of the company.
I think we're in the golden years for the NFL and college football.
Our demographic reach has continued to expand.
This is going to be really unlocking the streaming platform for sports fans.
Sports valuations are rising. We'll see when they peak.
You don't have to be the best in your sport to make a whole ton of money.
Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio.
This is the Bloomberg Business of Sports, where we explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Damian Sassower, along with my colleagues Scarlet Fu and Vanessa Perdomo. Later in the show, Bloomberg Originals chief correspondent Jason Kelly will be joining us as well. And Michael Barr, our good friend, will be back next week. Coming up, we check in on the NFL season as we get closer to the postseason. Former Super Bowl winning NFL head coach and NFL Network analyst Brian Billick joins us.
I love the fact that it is so competitive, particularly on the AFC side. Obviously, in the NFC, it's kind of focusing in on the Philadelphia Eagles and the Minnesota Vikings and just how great they have played.
We'll also hear a special conversation from our own Jason Kelly that he had with former NBA All-Star Jamal Mashburn.
After my sophomore year, after that game against Christian Laettner, I got invited to play against the first Dream Team. That was Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan.
All that and more is straight ahead on the Bloomberg Business of Sports. But first, we talk golf. We've been following the ongoing push and pull between the PGA and LIV Golf. Bloomberg Opinion columnist Adam Minter is out with a new piece on how Saudi-backed LIV forced the PGA to pay more to golfers. Thank you so much for joining us here on the show.
Adam, before we dig into that, just give us the state of play right now between LIV Golf and PGA, because they were rivals and they decided to merge, although that's an oversimplification of what they agreed to. And then things were kind of on hold for, it felt like, a couple of years. Where are we now?
Well, exactly. Things have been on hold, but they seem to have started to thaw in the last few weeks. And last week, Bloomberg News actually reported that LIV is looking at making an investment into the PGA's commercial arm. It'll own about 6% of it, and that will bring the valuation up to about $12 billion. That investment is not the merger, which seems to be off the table, but it should settle the litigation between the two leagues, the two tours, presuming that it gets approved during the Trump administration, which is likely.
So, Adam, let's be clear. The PIF, who owns LIV, the Saudis, they basically have, I think the first season of LIV, it was over $1 billion. The second season, over $1 billion. I mean, so they're in now for a couple billion. And what do they get? They get a 6% stake in the PGA's commercial arm, PGA Tour Enterprises. Now, what is that arm really responsible for? I mean, is that just an opco? Is that a holdco? I mean, what is that exactly?
Well, that's a great question, and it's something that a lot of people are asking about. But in a sense, it holds all of the PGA Tour's commercial entities. Specifically, and most importantly, it owns the media rights. So the revenues that come in for media rights, which every year total over $1 billion. So it's a significant sum of money, and in theory, at least, it should be growing as the PGA grows. So that's what they are essentially buying, is a chunk of the PGA's media revenues.
But does this 6%, you said how maybe the merger is kind of dead at this point. So is this 6% almost a good faith for the leagues to be working, for the tours to be working together?
Yes, exactly. I mean, for this to get approved, and there have been all kinds of antitrust concerns about this deal from the moment the merger was announced. This particular deal wasn't part of that. The Justice Department indicated that they would take a very critical eye to the deal. There is the hope that once this investment is made, that there can be some kind of collaboration and hopefully some kind of expansion. I mean, we're sort of seeing hints of it, just this week. There's going to be this made-for-TV golf event between LIV's Bryson DeChambeau and Brooks Koepka, and PGA's Scotty Scheffler and Royal McIlroy in Las Vegas. That wasn't going to happen before this deal was likely to happen. I mean, so there seems to be, and we'll just have to see what happens again after the deal is finalized and after it has regulatory approval, which is likely under the Trump administration. But ideally, from the point of view of PIF and LIV, there's actually going to be more collaboration down the line.
Okay, so collaboration, at the very least, they can coexist without descending into legal fights constantly.
Yeah, they'll stop suing each other. Yes.
Okay, which the PGA can't really afford, while LIV has kind of an unlimited purse here. So talk about what this looks like then, with the two of them coexisting and maybe collaborating. What does this presence of Saudi money mean in PGA Tour enterprises mean for the top golfers on the PGA Tour who are not employees of the tour but are independent contractors?
Right. And that's, I think, the most interesting side of this is, love it or hate it, LIV is responsible for really jacking up what golfers in both tours are being paid. It came in with a lot of money, and the PGA had to respond by paying its golfers more. And now that this is being tied up, the end game for the PGA is to do something that very few professional leagues or tours have ever done, and that is to give its top professionals, they're starting out with 193 golfers, start giving them equity in the league. Specifically, they're giving them equity in PGA Tour enterprises, the same thing that the Saudis are buying into. So the idea here is a couple-fold. I mean, one, they want the loyalty of the golfers, and they're not going to outspend PIF on golfers. I mean, John Rahm has allegedly got $300 million to go play for LIV. PGA Tour has made it clear that it just can't keep up with that, but it can grant equity. And the idea being that this is a better way to ensure the loyalty of golfers, maybe to ensure that they don't defect to rival leagues down the line. So it's really a big step forward. And it's kind of, it's not just, something that's happening in golf. This is to some extent, sort of the compensation package of the future in professional sports, unrivaled, the 3-on-3 women's league that's opening up early next year. One of the ways they're compensating their players is with equity. So the PGA isn't completely alone in doing this. They're certainly alone in doing it in golf, but it seems to be a trend that these leagues are starting to jump on as players rally for a bigger piece of the pie.
Okay, Adam, so here's where my brain goes. What on earth does this mean to that ridiculous team-oriented 20-player format that LIV had been kind of going around and playing these matches in these far-off places? Once this deal happens, do those go away? And look at all the money, the $350 million that was paid to Rahm to play in those tournaments.
Yeah.
What happened to those contracts? Did Rahm get all his money? Is he paid out? Is he in a good place if this all goes back to, the old format? I'm trying to better understand, what golf will look like in 2025. Any color on that?
Well, I think the team golf, the LIV is quite clear that it wants to continue with team golf. And in fact, the LIV is kind of offering its own equity deal. The team golf, in theory, these players have been told that they are going to be able to buy these teams, that they are going to, marketize these things. And folks can buy an LIV team, just like if you have
F1.
the money, you can go and buy. Yeah, F1,
So is that really
NFL,
what you're talking about? Like 20 teams, right? So 40 players, they basically come together and they come under a brand and people have equity in these kind of I see where you're going there. That's an interesting format.
Yeah, I think that's where it is. Now, whether fans want to watch it is another question. And that's the thing. It's great to have equity, but if it's equity in something that nobody wants to watch, that's not great equity. So we'll see. But the other side of it that you brought up that I think is really important and really interesting is this international side of it. I think a lot of people have sort of sniffed at the idea of these golfers going around the world into these markets that haven't typically seen PGA Tour or even, high value exhibition type golf, going in and playing a tour in them. The bet is that there is a global market for golf. And that bet has been out there for 3 decades. Greg Norman, who, is the face of LIV. He's wanted to do something like this since 1994 when he proposed something called the World Golf Championships, which was a limited field, high value purses. And Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer in 1994 put the kibosh on it. But there has been this tacit belief for several decades that there's a lot more money to be earned by taking the tour, the PGA Tour specifically, global. And LIV, with Norman at its head, sort of grasped onto that idea and said, let's give it a go. And so I think one of the things we may see, and I'm just totally speculating here, is more international play and perhaps some collaboration on the part of PGA and LIV into these markets like Southeast Asia, places like Hong Kong that haven't been real destinations for high-level golf historically.
It's really interesting that you say that, Adam, because obviously the PGA has been around for a very long time, and you could imagine that how long they've been around for, that they would have tried new things, or obviously they already have a very large revenue stream. So, but everyone's trying to make more money, obviously. One of the things that I found really interesting when you were talking about giving, the players equity or the golfers equity, and you brought in Unrivaled. I mean, that's a new league though, right? And there's only 33 players in that league to give equity to. It's a brand new league, so maybe you wouldn't do it every year. Obviously, they're going to see how it plays out. But how do you do that in something that's so established with 193 golfers?
Yeah. So the tour has, said that they're going to initially give out $930 million in equity grants to 193 players. And they've got a lot of criteria and groups that they're going to, they're doing this with. You'll get a grant, you'll get grants based on your years as a tour member, the number of times you've earned a spot in a tour championship, career earnings will play into all of these things. And there will even be, there are some grants that are reserved for what they're calling tour legends. So it's a very complicated set of criteria, and on top of it, an 8-year vesting period. What this looks like, after that 8 years, are players going to be selling their stakes? Will they have appreciated? Will there be more? Will there be, more, I don't know what you would call it, public offerings, where they're going to issue more equity in these leagues? Hard to say. But initially, it's going to be, I guess you would say, merit-based, in the sense that, they have these criteria that are merit-based, years as a tour member, and that's how they'll distribute that cash.
Adam, fantastic to get your perspective on this, and it was a really, really interesting column. Adam Minter is a Bloomberg Opinion columnist covering the business of sports, talking about the Saudi-backed LIV Golf forcing the PGA to pay up in many ways.
Up next on the show, we hear a special conversation with former NBA All-Star Jamal Mashburn. For my colleagues Scarlet Fu and Bloomberg Originals sports correspondent Vanessa Perdomo, I'm Damian Sassower, and you're listening to the Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio around the world.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio.
This is the Bloomberg Business of Sports, where we explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Damian Sassower, along with my colleagues Scarlet Fu and Vanessa Perdomo. Michael Barr will be back next week. Recently, Bloomberg Originals chief correspondent Jason Kelly got a chance to speak with former NBA All-Star Jamal Mashburn at American University in Washington, D.C. about Mashburn's career and pivot from the court to the world of business. Let's listen in on a portion of their conversation recorded live in front of an audience.
As we were chatting back in the green room there, and we were talking about different perceptions of, and we were having a conversation about, as you get older, you remember how you were as a kid and how your parents chatted with you, and then you move into their position, and now you're chatting with your kid the same way, with the same fears that your parents had. So to me, it's all the same. And when my mom and dad separated, my mom just sat there and just told me cold and sat me at the dinner table and said, I can no longer talk to you as a young kid. I just can't, because she's a single parent. We're in Harlem. When I walk out, I lived on the 8th floor. When I walk out, you can smell marijuana. It wasn't legal back then. You can smell people in the hallways. You can just a distinct smell, concrete. It's just a distinct, dingy smell that you smell and felt. And she was worried about my safety, essentially. My father was a professional boxer, but he transitioned to being an NYPD officer. And living in the projects, if your dad is an NYPD officer, a lot of people don't mess with you for a lot of different reasons because he's a cop. When he leaves the house, now you're on your own.
Right.
So my mom really taught me about and chatted with me about real world things. She took me out of Harlem and exposed me to museums. She would take me to restaurants, white tablecloth restaurants, and she couldn't afford to order, but she would allow me to order so I wouldn't be afraid to order off a menu.
Right.
And you would be surprised how many kids and some things that we take for granted as adults that other kids don't have an opportunity to be exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so my mom always chatted with me as an adult. So my language and diet for what I want to receive or wanted to participate in changed completely. It's just, I read comic books, but I read them differently. You know, not just looking at the pictures and imagining something, but actually reading the words and then interpreting what it actually was stating, you know? So that really shaped me to dream bigger.
Yeah.
And also one of the things that she taught me was to have courage. That's one of my core values. I'm unafraid. You know, I couldn't make it to the NBA if I was afraid. You know, there's a certain level of fear as you're going after something that you have to overcome. And, you know, nobody in my neighborhood was ever a professional basketball player. Didn't know many professional athletes. I knew my father as a mid-level boxer or something like that, but I had no blueprint. So my mom was the blueprint to give me those core values to be courageous, to go after it.
And so that clearly sets you up to make a different series of decisions, not just going into college, but coming out.
Yeah.
So you hire your first agent who, and I did a little prep with your wife, who totally set me up for this question. So thank you.
Of course.
Which is, listen, you got to report. You got to figure it out. But that's a key decision because this is a guy who is not the traditional NBA agent, right?
Yeah.
So tell us about that because, you know, everybody in this room has had to hire someone or work with someone to help them do something. You hired him for a very specific reason. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it goes back to Rick Pitino. Dave mentioned the basketball game I played in Kentucky against Duke. People regard that as probably one of the best college games ever. Depending on what side of the table you sit on.
Yeah. I believe your buddy Grant Hill threw the inbound pass.
I would consider he thinks it's a great game. You know? But no, in all seriousness, we learned a lot because that was the first time Kentucky could be back in the NCAA tournament.
Right.
And we went that far to the Elite Eight. The following year, we went to the Final Four and we lost to the Michigan Fab Five.
Mm-hmm.
So Coach Pitino was honest with me. And after my sophomore year, after that game against Christian Laettner, I got invited to play against the first Dream Team. That was Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan. We were part of a select 8 of us, myself, Grant Hill, Penny Hardaway, just to name a few. And we beat them on the first day. And we were the only team to beat them, even though they didn't want to give us credit for it, but we beat them. And Coach Pitino came back and he was like, I was taking summer school courses I want to say in maybe July or something like that. And so he pulled me in the office after that week spending out there with La Jolla, San Diego with the Dream Team. And he said, remember when I recruited you and you told me to be honest with you? I said, yeah. He said, well, today we're going to announce that you're turning pro before your junior year starts.
Wow.
And after the season is over, depending on how far we go, hopefully go to a championship, we're going to hire an agent and a business manager. I said, can I call my mother? And he said, yeah, you know, and then that next hour, we just announced it. And his strategy on that was, let's announce it and control it rather than other people throughout the whole season kind of always asking the question, are you turning pro?
Right.
So long story short, we lose to the Fab Five and hire an agent. And then there's 4 other people that come into the office, Coach Pitino's office, and they're business managers. 3 of the 4 never listened to what I want. I'm 19 years old at the time. And what I wanted was I want to retire after my first contract and step into a live, active business. But at 19, you have no, grasp of that concept. I know what the big idea is, don't know how to execute it. 3 of the 4 never listened. They chatted about their portfolio and what returns they were getting for their clients and different things like that. They were Morgan Stanley, this and that. One guy walks in, his name is Rick Abar, and he's 33 years old. And he says, I don't know what I'm doing here. Interesting.
It's a hell of an introduction. Yeah.
Great introduction. And he goes, Coach G wanted me to meet with you and different things like that and discuss possibilities of working for you and with you as you move forward. And he says, what do you want to accomplish? And I said, I want to step into a live active business. He sat back and he was like, okay, what does that look like? And I said, I really don't know at this particular time. And then I said, looked at his resume. He had his master's in finance, and he was also a CPA as well. And he told me everything that he couldn't do. And I said, that's interesting. Hired him on the spot. And
why?
I hired him on the spot because, first of all, my core value is honesty. That's my first thing. If you can't be honest with me, then we can't work together. I don't care if we're going to be successful or fail or whatever it is. I'm just not going to be able to participate. And I said to him, and one thing he was willing to do that the others didn't have the capacity or didn't get a chance for me to get to that particular point, teach me everything you know about finance. And he said, interesting. And I said, can you do that? He said, yeah. I said, what about accounting? He said, yeah, no problem. So when I hired him, we learned on my own cash flow statement, balance sheet, and that's how I learned. And I learned through real life deals.
Right.
My first investment was Outback Steakhouse. And that was through a relationship through Chris Sullivan. And he went to University of Kentucky, University of Florida as well. And he got wind that I wanted to participate in business. So I became an LP in Outback Steakhouse, and we opened up 34 stores, eventually sold that. But it was the relationship. It was somebody.
Sorry, did you say 34 Outback Steakhouse? That's a lot of Outback Steakhouse.
Yeah,
it's a lot of bloomin' onions, man.
A lot of bloomin' onions, yeah, a lot of bloomin'. But if doing business in California, where you got to go. But at the end of the day, that's how it started. It started with that transparency and that honesty and really telling him what I didn't know.
Right.
Rather than what I do know. And vice versa for him as well. And that's where it started. And
it seems like that is a theme that you've had throughout your career too. And this notion, which I think has, as I alluded to at the beginning, sort of come into vogue, but was not obvious then, which is this notion of being a partner and a principal rather than just an asset. And rather than someone who's like, yeah, I'll slap my name on that. This notion of being not just engaged, but invested.
Yeah, and I think sometimes there's if we go back in time and look at the athlete, a lot of times, and I was sharing this with at the other event that we were at earlier, people don't necessarily look at the athlete as a human being anymore. They look at him as a dollar sign or something that they couldn't attempt to do, or they see life through their eyes or whatever it may be. But the realization of it is that overnight for an athlete, once they get drafted or once they sign their marketing deal before they get drafted, which I did with Fila, was you instantly become the patriarch of the family. Not that you've earned it financially. You're the guy that everybody comes to. And for a 20-year-old kid who hasn't got their life in order, it's a very difficult position to be in. You become the savior of not only your family, but your whole community, essentially. And that's where a lot of guys go wrong, and they try to save everybody. My mom told me something one day, and it rang true throughout the course of time. She's like, have you ever been on a plane? She knew I've been on a plane, but she was just using that as a setup. You can only carry one carry-on bag. I was like, yeah. She said, why are you trying to carry all your friends with you then? And I said, that's a great business. And then she went on and she said, at the end of the day, if somebody's going to sit next to you, and we expanded on it, they have to add value and be able to pay for their own seat on the plane. That's how I looked at it. So then as I started to look around and building teams and adding people to an organization, I started to assess what value do they bring to the table. Things that I can't see and things that I can see. Intrinsic value, basically. And that's how I've just operated on that particular plane. We all have to be valuable and an asset to the particular team.
That's Bloomberg Originals chief correspondent Jason Kelly speaking with former NBA All-Star Jamal Mashburn in a special conversation in front of a live audience at American University in Washington, D.C. Up next, we turn to the NFL with former Super Bowl champion head coach Brian Billick.
Bill Belichick is going to take over the entire organization. He's going to run it like a pro franchise. And it's all about what? The NIL and acquiring players.
For my colleagues Scarlet Fu, Vanessa Perdomo, and Jason Kelly, I'm Damian Sassower, and you're listening to the Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio around the world.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio.
Thanks for joining us on the Bloomberg Business of Sports, where we explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Damian Sassower, along with my colleagues, Bloomberg Originals chief correspondent Jason Kelly and Bloomberg Originals sports correspondent Vanessa Perdomo. Michael Barr will be back next week. We've got the NFL season heating up as we get closer to the playoffs. We figured it'd be a good time to check in with friend of the show, former Super Bowl winning head coach and NFL Network analyst Brian Billick. Welcome back, Brian. Welcome back, Coach Billick, to the Bloomberg Business of Sports.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
And for our audience, we should know that Coach Billick has just announced that he has a third grandchild. He's in the hospital calling in. So welcome back. And, talk to us a little bit about the NFL season. Talk to us a little bit about the playoffs are almost upon us. Talk about your Baltimore Ravens. I mean, they're looking pretty good, but they've got Pittsburgh this weekend. What's your take?
Yeah, exciting season. I love the fact that it is so competitive, particularly on the AFC side. Obviously, in the NFC, it's kind of focusing in on the Philadelphia Eagles and the Minnesota Vikings and just how great they have played. And Philadelphia just looks overpowering right now. Yeah. And it's amazing, 4 weeks into the season, it was like, boy, what's wrong with Philadelphia? Where are they going? They just don't seem like they're having fun. They don't look like they believe in themselves and have been on an incredible run. On the AFC side, and the Ravens are in the thick of it, as is Pittsburgh. Great weekend. I mean, I'm biased, but I think the Pittsburgh-Baltimore weekend, anytime they play, it's the best rivalry in football. It's the most physical rivalry in football. But then, of course, you've got the Kansas City Chiefs, who just seem to just kind of get it done. Certainly the injury to Patrick Mahomes is going to be a factor. And then I think everybody's favorite, the Buffalo Bills, and the year that Josh Allen's having.
Here's some late motion. Fakes the throw. Allen going to step up in the pocket. Now he's going to take it and run, and he's got the first down and more. 10, 5, and muscles his way into the end zone for an unbelievable 26-yard touchdown run. Are you kidding me?
Just incredible.
And so, Coach Billick, we look at a season like this, and it's funny, sort of coming off of the Major League Baseball season, where it just felt like one of those seasons that was like good for the business of baseball. Feels similarly here with football. You've got some great rivalries, you've got some traditional ones, some new ones coming up. You're someone who really understands the nuts and bolts of this business well from lots of different angles. How would you describe sort of the health of the business of football, in a season like this?
Well, you're exactly right, and it couldn't be better. There seems to be an insatiable interest in the National Football League. And I think it's great that obviously coming in, the story was all about the Kansas City Chiefs. Can they three-peat? Obviously a phenomenal team, phenomenal talent in Patrick Mahomes. And I think it's been good for the league, the fact that they have, and I say struggle, I mean, they're sitting here with only one loss, but it's all a 3-point win, 4-point win. They haven't been as dominant. So that kind of, they've kind of reached the level of, everybody hates the Yankees, because of the success. Well, they're envious and anybody but Kansas City. And the fact that they have kept such close margins means that everybody's in it. And that's great for the league because that means across the board, like we say, even particularly in the AFC and even in the NFC, there's going to be a surprise team when we get into the playoffs that has a little momentum, that right now you kind of go, well, I don't know if they have this or that, and how deep will they go into the playoffs, but all of a sudden they step in and they're a factor, and they will climb their way up. So the interest, obviously, in the league right now as we get into the expanded format of the playoffs and heading toward a Super Bowl with so many great storylines. Can Kansas City repeat? Is Philadelphia going to continue on now and pick up that mantle of being the dominant team that they are? Is this a special season for a great storyline like Sam Darnold in Minnesota, coming from where he came from? So there's some great storylines that are really captivating the country right now.
And so to that point, Coach, I mean, it's interesting because when you do have these resurgent careers, I'm glad you mentioned Sam Darnold, you look across the league, a lot of quarterbacks who've sort of found a second or a third life, whether it's Geno Smith, whether it's, I'm an Atlanta guy, Kirk Cousins, we'll see. That's an entirely different podcast. But it does make me think, again, as someone who's been a decision maker in these teams, if you're still in it, you have to sort of make different decisions than you would if you were out of it. And, obviously here in the New York area, Giants and the Jets, they don't have to worry about making the playoffs. But there are a lot of teams who are probably having to manage themselves, manage their personnel, even manage some of their coaching situations a little bit differently because they're still hanging around. Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, those that are out of it are making those decisions more long-term. They're going to start playing players, putting people in a position to go, okay, well, we need to find out about player A, player B, player C, so it'll help guide our decisions in the off-season, so you see that rotation of personnel in the way that they're playing. Those, and obviously the ones that are on the top of the league, they're just all focused on, can we win another Super Bowl? But then those that are in the margins, that are close, let's take a team like the Los Angeles Rams, that obviously have the pedigree, but they have to play in a way that says, look, we can be that surprise team. So they have to push the margins that way with the players and who they're going to play. And obviously not the least of which is the health of the team. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about teams that have their playoff positions secured. So how much do we play our starters? How do we rest them? The rest or rust discussion we always have late in the season versus those teams that have to literally play their way in and extend their season, even though they're just on the cusp right now. And a team like the Minnesota Vikings is fascinating circumstance in terms of here they draft J.J. McCarthy, and he's going to be their guy, and he gets hurt, and now you got Sam Darnold. They're going to extend Sam Darnold. And what does that mean for J.J. McCarthy going forward? So the Minnesota Vikings are in an interesting position in terms of making a legitimate Super Bowl run, but obviously have personnel decisions that are more long-term.
Vanessa, listen to Coach Billick talking about the Vikings. You're right, the Vikings look great, but, I mean, Vanessa, there's a lot more going on in the NFL right now, from NAL to sports betting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really fascinating is when we're talking about personnel, coaching decisions, and then you look at college football, NIL, and then you look at what Bill Belichick just did, jumping over to college football. What are your thoughts there, Brad?
Well, Bill Belichick, I think, will do a phenomenal job. And, it's interesting. It's typical Bill Belichick. This is a guy where most coaches are bailing out of college football. And for good reason, because it's a mess. The NIL, the portal, the NCAA is feckless in terms of the direction that they're giving that we'll eventually get to in college football. And here Bill Belichick goes back, and he has an affinity for North Carolina. People say, well, why would he do that, and is he going to be any good? I think he's going to be phenomenal because he's going to bring that level of expertise. Bill Belichick is going to take over the entire organization. He's going to run it like a pro franchise. And it's all about what? The NIL and acquiring players. And Bill Belichick, who's very tied into the agent community, because that's who's running college football right now. The presidents, the NCAA are absolutely useless right now. It is, and that's got to come back. They've got to put a structure in to where they bring some structure to it. Bill Belichick has got it sized up very well, and I think he's going to do very well at North Carolina.
Coach Billick, I wonder if you have any thoughts here on the role private equity might play in the valuations of a lot of these sports franchises. I mean, we know that they're involved, and we know they're coming in with the Dolphins and the Bills just announcing. I mean, how do you think that's going to change the game?
Interesting, because what I'm interested to see is how the NFL handles that in terms of from the overall standpoint, because the NFL has obviously been very protective. That ownership has to have majority. They don't have group ownerships. They've been because they wanted to have a singular voice. They wanted each franchise to be run by a singular person, whatever is the structure underneath that person. And now to insert this kind of private equity that's going to have a larger stake in it. I, for one, and I don't know how that's going to play out. Clearly, it's going to come because it's all about the money. I mean, at the end of the day, people want to speak to groups in general and talk about, well, tell us about the NFL. And it's, well, first you got to understand, the NFL sells stuff. That's job one. That's what they sell seat licenses, they sell tickets, they see streaming rights. It's all about making money. And so now I'm going to be interested to see how, obviously, what is going to happen in terms of this private equity coming into it, how the league regulates that to make sure that they still have control and that there's still that singular ownership at the top of the franchises.
And so, Coach, one of the things, and I know you do some work with X-Tech shoulder pads and look very closely at sort of the technology of the game. That plays into safety, that plays into the rulemaking, and some of the revisions to the rules that we've seen happen at the NFL. They want to keep the audience coming, the audience they have. They want to keep growing the audience. What's your take on, some of the rule changes, especially kickoffs, which seems like it's been pretty successful in terms of making the game more exciting? Because I loved what you said. This is ultimately all about selling stuff. This is about keeping eyeballs on it. So what do you make of sort of that broader ecosystem right now?
Well, I think people need to recognize, because obviously ownership in the NFL as a whole sometimes is criticized as, well, you really don't care about the players. They're just facilitate the profit for you. But the league, just from a business, forget the moral and ethical aspect of the league wanting to do what's best for the players. Just look at it from a business standpoint. This is an incredible asset. They're going to take care of that asset. So they're going to make sure that the rules and that the way that these players are protected, because they want those assets to perform for as long and as effectively as they possibly can. So the league is very focused on that. You talk whether it's the helmets that they're doing. Everybody's seeing now the different variations of helmets technologically that are coming in to protect the players. X-Tech pads is the forefront of the shoulder pads. You take the head out of the game, obviously the shoulder pads become more important. The advances that X-Tech pads has done is their number one pad in all of pro football, because it's another layer and bringing the technological advances that we have to the forefront to protect the players. So, it's all very much about that, the possible expansion of the league, although I don't know that that's going to happen in Europe the way we're seeing it. They're going to expand their market and selling stuff, certainly, so they're going to continue to tap into that. I don't know. It's above my pay grade to understand how a team would actually function maybe in Europe in terms of the way it would get integrated into the league. So everything about it says, yes, this is an unbelievable, insatiable desire for the game. We're going to press the limits of it. We're going to put it on as much as we possibly can. We're going to maximize the dollars and cents from it in a lot of different ways.
Coach Brian Billick, NFL Network analyst, former Super Bowl winning NFL head coach, and friend of the show. Thank you for taking time away from the birth of your third grandson to be with us here today. A real privilege to have you, sir. Thank you so much, Coach.
Glad to do it. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on this edition of the Bloomberg Business of Sports. For my colleagues, Scarlet Fu, Jason Kelly, and Vanessa Perdomo, I'm Damian Sassower. Tune in again next week for the latest on the stories moving big money in the world of sports. And don't forget to catch our podcast on all your podcast platforms. You're listening to the Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio around the world.